here today to talk a little bit about my lifelong interest in the subject of animal minds, and most specifically whether it's possible for science one day to quantify the fact that some animals at least have a sense of self-awareness. The journey started for me at the age of about 45 years ago, with the family cat, Fifi. Thank you for the R. She was a very engaging cat, and I used to spend many hours chattering away to her quite happily, telling her all my hopes and dreams, quite confident that one day she'd deign to reply. My world was shattered when my older brother, Duncan, who's wise in the world of science, explained to me that there was no chance of her ever replying, that cats are basically stupid, he said. There's nothing going on in Fifi's mind apart from food, stroke, like, dislike, that's it. No space for anything else at all. I was devastated, and I thought, this can't be right. Surely Fifi has some internal thoughts of her own. Surely she has a will and an ability to reflect on her predicament, at least. It got me thinking, and it's a thought that I've never let go of over the last 45 years. A bit later on in my life, maybe as a 16, 17-year-old surly teenager, I remember I was a punk rocker. I went to Brighton Dolphinarium. Very little impressed me in those days, but I remember looking into the eye of a dolphin there and getting a jolt that he was looking right back at me with the same level of understanding, at least, as I had of myself. It made me think and reminded me of this idea of the inner lives of animals. Now, the key word there is punk rocker. Yeah, spiky hair, everything. Those are the days. But I was a very difficult child to teach. I was expelled from school several times, and I was very happily working on building sites in my late teens and early 20s. One day, I picked up a copy of the Times newspaper, and on about page 7, there was an article by a Russian scientist called Dr. Tchaikovsky. He'd been doing some experiments using dolphins as midwives in human births. So the idea was that women were lying in the shallows, the dolphin would echolocate using its sonar on the embryo. When the baby was born, they'd nudge it up from the water onto the mother's breast. The most amazing thing to me, though, was that apparently, years later, when the children that the dolphins had assisted in the births of returned to the sea, the dolphins were able to pick them out of a crowd of other individuals that they'd never met before. I remember just being absolutely amazed by this. I thought, this should be on page 1 of the Times. This shouldn't be buried on page 7. This is really quite interesting. This is something that suddenly actually impressed me. So I looked at my CV. I noticed I only had 3 O-levels. So I decided to go back to college. I did some Open University courses. I went to University College London, studied psychology. And in my 3rd year, I did my dissertation on the evolution of dolphin intelligence. I then did a master's degree at Imperial College in science communication. And in the same year, there was a national debate, well, an international debate, about the ethics of whaling. The International Whaling Commission had just granted Japan limited whaling rights again. And the independent newspaper published a leading article which said that to that date, there was no known scientific evidence to tell the difference in mental capacity between a cow and a dolphin. Therefore, if we could eat cows, we could eat dolphins. And I remember thinking, there is a way to tell the difference between these two things. I'd just done a 10,000-word dissertation on the subject. So I was able to produce this article, my first ever piece, for the science page of The Independent, explaining the difference between a whale and a cow. It basically comes down to an encephalization quotient, or an EQ, which is a measure of an animal's brain size to its body mass. Basically, a cow or a cat or a seal has an EQ of 1, which is just enough brain to run the animal, nothing left over for any kind of abstract thought or reasoning. So basically, Duncan, my brother, was right. Cats are quite stupid. But dolphins are not stupid. Dolphins have an EQ of 5.4. They have 5 times more brain capacity than they need to run a basic aquatic animal. They live in social groups, so it makes perfect sense that some of this extra brain power is used for understanding the relationships within the groups and possibly reflecting on themselves. There's a very important scientific paper called The Evolutionary Advantage of Being Stupid, which shows that no animal carries extra brain tissue because it's very hard to feed. Therefore, if there is any extra brain, it must be doing something. Subject of this piece was exactly that, speculating that the thing that they must be doing is reflecting on themselves, able to suffer if you harpoon them, etc. I published the article, and I was quite confident that it would be taken up by animal rights movements and the international scientists and the International Whaling Commission themselves, but total silence, nothing, no effect at all. So I found myself as a very highly qualified to write about the subject of animal intelligence, but not very much else. So I became a science writer and travelled the world as well, doing adventure travel stories. I badgered the editor of a glossy magazine for 2 years, and I managed to get him to send me on a trip to Florida to swim with dolphins. I argued that it was a lifestyle thing. Everybody wanted to swim with dolphins. Everyone said it was a life-changing experience. And after 2 years of badgering, he agreed. And he sent me on this story. There's me, being towed along by dolphins. And it was a life-changing experience for me, not in any transcendental or mystical way, but because I got to see dolphins behaving close up. What struck me most was that there was a particular dolphin at the Dolphin Research Center in Florida Keys called Stanley, who seemed to be using humour. Now, before we went in the water, there were about 6 of us, members of the public and a couple of journalists like myself, being briefed by a lady who clearly didn't like members of the public or journalists. These were her dolphins, and we were a necessary evil that brought income to the dolphin program. So she was briefing us very strictly. She had a whistle. She liked blowing it when we got out of line, and certainly when the dolphins got out of line. She was telling us what we could and couldn't do. Now, Stanley was swimming back and forth, one eye out the water like this, blowhole on the waterline, just looking at us. Halfway through the briefing, he got a bit bored, and with his blowhole, he went like this. Of course, we all started to laugh. The lady didn't like it at all. She blew a whistle. Stanley, go away. Stanley moved off a bit, like this. Of course, we laughed. It was quite funny. Discipline was breaking down, though. The lady got more cross. We could see this. Stanley moved further away. Stanley, don't come back. She's going like this, blowing the whistle. Stanley, right from the far side of the lagoon, like this. It was extremely funny. Stanley went under the waves, and that was it. We thought, OK, we've now got to be good, otherwise she's not going to let us go in with the dolphins. So we all stood like naughty school children. And after about 30 seconds or a minute, we were all kind of gathering our composure again. We heard this other noise from right underneath the floating dock where we were standing. Like this. It was cripplingly funny. We were crying with laughter. And Stanley knew he'd overdone it. He didn't come back up to take a bow. No. He'd just gone. But I was thinking, why did he do that? This is really, really funny. Under the water there somewhere is a little animal with a great big brain trying to tell us something. He's trying to communicate with us. Why? What's in it for him? Conventional science would say stimulus response. He's got no internal thoughts. He just associates human laughter with getting fish. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe, but he's never once been fed fish by a visitor. He's only ever been fed fish by the lady with a whistle. No chance of a fish from this lady now. She's really cross. Why did he do that? He was using humour. So I went back home, I wrote my piece, and I thought about humour. I looked up all the literature I could find on the psychology of humour. And humour is a very interesting subject. If you can tell a joke to someone, if you can make someone laugh, you're instantly advertising that you're quite intelligent, that you have empathy, you have social skills, and you can manipulate the internal reality of other people's expectations. That's what humour's all about. It's when 2 different worlds collide. It's a carefully constructed subject where you're deliberately playing with other people's mental states. One of the most important things about humour is that it means that you have to have a theory of mind in order to do it. You have to understand that other people have expectations that you're then confounding. And humour, when it takes place, can be measured with a brain scan. If you wear an EEG headgear, it's basically like an electric shower cap with electrodes coming off it, every time you experience the understanding of a joke, that sudden realization creates exactly the same brainwaves throughout the population. It's called a P3N4. So you get a joke like, horse goes into a bar, barman says, why the long face? You think, long face, long face. So you go P3N4 as you realize like that. There's no other thing, apart from humour, that will create this P3N4. So suddenly, I had a plan. I had to tell a dolphin a joke whilst it's wearing an EEG headgear. What could possibly go wrong? I persuaded Penguin that this was a good idea for a book. They commissioned it, and I promptly moved to France to write the book. It was all going quite well until, in about 2005, my father died, and my whole family decided to regroup and have a good old think. And logically, obviously, the next step was to buy a broken-down zoo to save 250 animals who were going to be euthanized. Now, I was in favour of this because it was obviously the right thing to do, and possibly at some point we could acquire intelligent animals and I could sit and play with them and pretend I was working. But it turned out to be a massive distraction from my overall plan of exploring animal intelligence. Being a journalist, I naturally wrote a book about the subject called We Bought a Zoo, which was made into a film of the same name, starring Matt Damon as myself. Obviously, you can see the striking physical resemblance. It was extremely distracting. Here we are, my family, my little children as they were then, on the set with Matt Damon in 2011 or so when it was being filmed. My children, interestingly, pushed past Damon and Scarlett Johansson to play with Crystal the monkey, who's there sitting on my shoulder, who they recognised from Night at the Museum too. The allure of animals. It's brought other distractions, like the fabulously funny celebrity Ross Noble came to the zoo to do some filming. Here he is impersonating Scarlett Johansson in the restaurant in front of a poster. Cripplingly funny man. But anyway, I didn't lose track of the fact that I'm actually all about exploring animal intelligence. And I've been reading up all these last few years in between other stuff on particularly Coco the gorilla. Now, Coco is a hand-reared gorilla who's been taught sign language, American Sign Language for the deaf, from a very early age. At the age of 3 or 4, she had 290 signs. 250 signs would have qualified her to get into primary school. She's also got, she's now got a vocabulary of about 800, 900, which is about normal for a fluent deaf signer, because you have 10 or so different modulators for each sign. So she can say alligator or alligator. So she has an enormously large vocabulary. Now, Coco also makes up her own signs, so she completely understands the concept. She doesn't like the sign for brush, so she decided to call it a scratch comb. Many of these. She can also talk about her mental states. She can say, Coco is sad, Coco is happy, Coco was sad. Sorry, this is a picture of Coco with her little pet. Allball is the name of this little kitten. And Coco was very sad when Allball was unfortunately run over by a truck, and she can still refer to that incident in the past tense. Coco was sad. So she understands that she has mental states, and she can communicate this to other people. Also, Coco has a sense of humour. There was an anecdote of a researcher who asked Coco if she could touch her nose. Coco touched her nose. Touch her mouth. Touched her mouth. Touch her ear. No problem. So the researcher gets the video camera out, says, OK, Coco, touch your nose. It goes like this. Coco, touch your mouth. Coco, touch your eye. So in the end, the researcher got frustrated and said, Coco, naughty gorilla. Coco signs, Coco, funny gorilla. Deliberately making a joke. Unfortunately, this is inadmissible to science. This is all probably stimulus response in some anecdotal hearsay way and will never affect the rights of animals. But I'm not giving up. Now, I'm a zoo director. I have access to other people's primates. I don't have any big-brained, intelligent primates of my own. But last week, I was able to deliver some touch screens donated by Panasonic for a research program involving chimpanzees in a rehabilitation facility in Holland. Now, these chimpanzees have never seen touchscreens before, but it's well known that they can actually engage with them. And at the moment, it's for enrichment and stimulation, but I'm hoping that ultimately we'll be able to build a research program based on the chimpanzees' interaction with these screens. One of the things I particularly want to do is to play them clips that they find amusing. If I can find a clip that chimpanzees definitely find amusing, and I can get one of them to sit with an EEG headgear on, this is basically a P3N4. So far, there's never been one elicited from any species other than a human. I've got a clip in mind, actually. There's a group of orangutans at Singapore Zoo who are particularly friendly. Apparently they play a game with the visitors where they hang from a post, and the visitor hangs from a post. You try to grab a banana off a table with your foot. Obviously, the visitors have a lot of trouble with this, and when the visitors have made a complete fool of themselves, the orangutan grabs it, peels it, eats it, all with its feet. Everybody laughs. I'm sure that the Dutch chimps will find that clip extremely funny. Then we're going to get a P3N4 from a non-human species. When that happens, I'm going to go and lie down on a beach, put my feet up. I'm never going to do a stroke of work ever again in my life. I'm going to let other people sort out the scientific and moral and legal implications of that. But I'd like to end on this slide, which shows the incredible wonder on the face of this elephant who's been taken by his keepers to the aquarium section of the zoo to meet the sea lion for the first time, just for some stimulation and enrichment. It's evident to us in the room, it's experiencing a sense of wonder, but unfortunately there is no scientific evidence to say that that's what's going on. And so that elephant is legally classed as property and chattels. It doesn't have any basic rights. So that's evident to us. There's no evidence in actual science, which is going to be the rest of my life's work, which I'm hoping to achieve possibly in the next 18 months. So thank you very much for listening.